When you hear the name Albert Einstein, what comes to mind? Perhaps it's the image of a wild-haired genius scribbling equations on a blackboard, or maybe it's the famous photograph of him playfully sticking out his tongue. For decades, Einstein has been wrapped in layers of mythology that have transformed him from a brilliant physicist into an almost mythical figure, a symbol of pure genius that seems almost superhuman. But here's the fascinating truth. The real Albert Einstein was far more complex, contradictory, and human than the sanitized version we often encounter in textbooks and popular culture. Behind the iconic image lies a man who struggled with personal relationships, made profound mistakes, held controversial political views, and wrestled with doubts about his own theories that would revolutionize our understanding of the universe. Today, we're going to peel back the layers of legend and examine the authentic Einstein, not the caricature, but the actual human being who lived, loved, failed, and triumphed in ways that might surprise you. We'll explore the myths that have grown around his name and separate them from the documented facts of his extraordinary life. Did you know, for instance, that Einstein wasn't actually a poor student who failed mathematics? This persistent myth has been debunked countless times, yet it continues to circulate. The truth is that Einstein mastered differential and integral calculus before he was 15, years ahead of his peers. When confronted with this myth later in life, Einstein himself reportedly laughed and said, "Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." Or consider this. While we often picture Einstein as a solitary genius working in isolation, the reality is that he was deeply collaborative, engaging in extensive correspondence with fellow scientists and thriving on intellectual debate. His greatest discoveries emerged not from lonely contemplation, but from passionate discussions, heated arguments, and the exchange of ideas with some of the brightest minds of his era. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Einstein we think we know, the pacifist, the humanitarian, the gentle professor, was also a man of profound contradictions. He advocated for peace while later supporting the development of nuclear weapons. He championed civil rights in America while struggling with complex feelings about his Jewish identity in Europe. He spoke eloquently about love and compassion, while his personal relationships were often tumultuous and marked by infidelity. These contradictions don't diminish Einstein's legacy. They make it richer, more human, and ultimately more inspiring. Because the real story isn't about a superhuman genius who effortlessly unlocked the secrets of the universe. It's about a passionate, flawed, brilliant human being who changed our understanding of reality itself while grappling with the same struggles that face us all: love, loss, purpose, and the search for meaning in an uncertain world. So join us as we embark on this journey through the life of one of history's most fascinating figures. We'll explore his childhood in Germany, his struggles as a young patent clerk in Switzerland, his meteoric rise to scientific fame, his escape from Nazi persecution, and his final years as both a revered icon and a somewhat isolated figure in Princeton, New Jersey. By the end of our exploration, you'll discover that the truth about Einstein is far more compelling than any myth, because the real Albert Einstein was not just a genius, but a complete human being whose story continues to inspire, challenge, and surprise us more than half a century after his death. Let's begin our journey into the real Einstein by examining his earliest years, because it's here that some of our most persistent myths about him first take root. The story often told is of a slow child, perhaps even learning disabled, who didn't speak until he was 4 and struggled academically. This narrative has become so entrenched that it's used to comfort parents of late developing children worldwide. But like so many Einstein myths, this one crumbles under the weight of historical evidence. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in Ulm, Germany, to Hermann and Pauline Einstein. While it's true that Albert was a quiet child who spoke later than some of his peers, the idea that he was intellectually delayed is simply false. His sister Maya later recalled that Albert was speaking in complete sentences by age 2.5, which is actually quite normal. The delay that did exist was not in his ability to think, but in his preference for precision. Young Albert would reportedly rehearse sentences in his head before speaking them aloud, leading his family to worry unnecessarily about his development. This early perfectionism would become a defining characteristic throughout his life. Einstein himself later described his childhood speech patterns, explaining that he would whisper sentences to himself before saying them aloud, earning him the family nickname Der Depert, the dopey one. But this wasn't dopiness at all. It was the early manifestation of the meticulous thinking that would later revolutionize physics. The Einstein household was one where intellectual curiosity was not just encouraged, but celebrated. Hermann Einstein was an engineer and entrepreneur who co-owned an electrical engineering company with his brother Jacob. The family home buzzed with discussions of mathematics, engineering, and the latest technological innovations. This environment was crucial in shaping young Albert's mind. He wasn't growing up in intellectual isolation, but rather in a family that lived and breathed scientific thinking. One of the most significant moments in Einstein's early development came when he was just 5 years old. His father showed him a pocket compass, and Albert was absolutely mesmerized by the invisible force that made the needle point north no matter how he turned the device. This wasn't just childhood wonder. It was Einstein's first encounter with what he would later call the deeply hidden things in reality. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life, describing it as one of his most formative experiences. By age 12, Einstein had taught himself algebra and geometry. His uncle Jacob would pose mathematical problems to him as puzzles, and Albert would work on them with the intensity of a detective solving a mystery. When Jacob introduced him to the Pythagorean theorem, Albert insisted on proving it himself before accepting it as true, an approach that foreshadowed his later skepticism toward accepted scientific wisdom. Perhaps the most telling indicator of Einstein's early intellectual gifts was his relationship with mathematics textbooks. While other children his age were struggling with basic arithmetic, 12-year-old Albert acquired a geometry textbook that he devoured with such passion that his family called it his sacred little geometry book. He would later write that this book contained lucid and certain knowledge that gave him an almost religious feeling of wonder. But Einstein's childhood wasn't just about academic brilliance. It was also marked by early signs of the independence and skepticism that would define his adult character. Raised in a secular Jewish household, Albert was nonetheless required to attend Catholic elementary school, where he excelled academically but bristled against the rigid authoritarianism of German education. Even as a child, he questioned authority and resisted conformity, traits that would later put him at odds with both the German academic establishment and, eventually, the Nazi regime. These formative years reveal something crucial about Einstein that the myths obscure. His genius wasn't a sudden flowering in adulthood, nor was it the result of overcoming early intellectual deficits. Instead, it was the steady, consistent development of a mind that was naturally curious, rigorously logical, and fundamentally independent from the very beginning. The child who carefully rehearsed his words before speaking would become the scientist who carefully examined every assumption before accepting it as truth. Understanding this foundation is essential because it helps us see that Einstein's later revolutionary thinking didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from seeds planted in a childhood that was intellectually rich, emotionally supportive, and marked by an early fascination with the hidden forces that govern our universe.